So you can tell it's the end of the day. But because it's the end of the day, we know you have a lot of unasked questions that haven't been asked yet. It's been an interesting day, hasn't it? Hasn't it? I don't know about you, but there are things that we learn from each other, which was important. And a lot of us, face it, thought we knew it all, right? So now we don't. So here's the chance for a good wrap-up, and also to pitch a little forward, to talk about, we've talked at length about what happened, what didn't happen, what bounced back, what didn't. Some people got drunk on stage. We won't name any names. But I'm just saying that we have an opportunity here to now leave with something important by answering this last question. What does New Orleans now know? This morning we started with what have we learned and what is New Orleans, and now we're going to talk about what we have learned. And we're going to do it with a pretty interesting group, as we've had interesting collections all day. Starting from my far left, Gary Rivlin, who's the author of Katrina After the Flood. He covered Katrina and its aftermath for the New York Times. He writes about how the storm affected the fabric and the infrastructure of the city. Next to him is the fabulous, we coordinated our outfits, Cherice Harrison Nelson, who is an artist and co-founder and curator of the Mardi Gras Indians Hall of Fame. Next to her is Michael Hecht, who's the president and CEO of Greater New Orleans. Next to him is Judith Rodin, whose the title of her book, of course, is The Resilient City, The Resilient Dividend. I should know that. But as a result of that, we're not going to drink when we say that. We're going to treat it with respect. And because also she has founded this Resilience Dividend Project in 100 cities around the country. So New Orleans, comes equipped with ways of looking forward. Gary Rivlin is next to her. And John Barry is next to her. I'm looking at the wrong list. And John Barry is author of Rising Tide. He's a distinguished scholar at the Tulane Center for Bioenvironmental Research, and he may be making a special appearance tonight on the PBS NewsHour. And Bennie Pete, he of the tuba. He is also an important and founder and band leader of the Hot 8 brass band, of which more in a few moments. But I want to start out the same way we started out this morning by asking everybody in our panel to tackle this question. What do we know now? Not only what did we learn today, but what does 10 years later, what has New Orleans learned about itself, about where it goes next, and about what questions haven't been raised and what haven't been answered. I'm going to ask them all to speak to that, but I want to ask you to speak to it as well. Now, all my only rules are that we try to avoid speeches. We've had our share, and that we try to get some conversation going with you, with them, and among ourselves. And the more, how should I say, succinct your questions are and succinct your answers are, the more and better conversation we can have. I want to start with you, Gary, with the answer to the question.
It's not very optimistic, I'm afraid. I really feel like New Orleans has discovered it has a worse race problem than it thought. It's a divided city. There was this sense right after the storm that it would be a do-over, that whatever problems the city had before, would magically go away, but it turns out that the same problems that were there before, you still have the day after the storm, but now you have this other huge set of issues. I also feel that in Black New Orleans, what they have learned is they don't count as much as they thought they might. The example that comes to me is the mayor, who I have a lot of respect for, but back in May had a State of the City address, and he announced that the recovery is behind us, kind of his mission accomplished, and go to the neighborhoods. I mean, you've got the 7th Ward, African-American working class neighborhood, maybe 60% back. You've got Pontchartrain Park, middle-class Black neighborhoods, 67, 75% back.
Can I ask you to pitch it forward? So what do we do now? What do we learn now?
That's what I'm saying. That I really feel like there's a Black narrative and a white narrative, and they're side by side, and there needs to be more interaction. I mean,
Let me bounce that off of Cherice, and I want to phrase it this way, which is there a Black narrative and a white narrative? And so what? He started by saying we thought after Katrina happened, everything would be fine and beautiful, and it's not. Did anybody really expect it to be fine and beautiful?
I don't think people thought it would be fine and beautiful, but I can tell you personally that I didn't think we would be having the conversations that we're having today. I was a public school educator I was one of the 7,500 people who were fired with 24 years of experience. I have a master's degree and special certification in gifted and talented. You could not have told me that I would not get to drop, so I could do all the things I want to do in my cultural community. That was my goal for life. I did go back to work at the Recovery School District, and I don't care what is said, they failed children in the beginning. They were not prepared for children, and the day I basically decided that I had to quit was when we went to a hotel much like this downtown, and in service, and the facilitator said, we're building the plane as we're flying it. You're talking about children's lives, and if I'm building a plane, we're probably gonna crash, and I dare you. I saw children fed frozen lunches, frozen milk. They could not drink the milk, they could not eat the food. If I did that as a parent, I would be charged with child neglect and child endangerment. If you do that to 400 children under the age of 12, and you're the state of Louisiana, my question is it any less child abuse or child neglect? And children's needs are still not being met. So for me, I think we're at a crossroad to figure this out and give children what's best for them to serve the needs of all of the citizens of New Orleans. And it is a racial issue, but it is a humanity issue. Where's your humanity if you allow this to happen?
Mike Hecht, have we fallen short?
Well, I think I'll answer this maybe more from the perspective of economic development, which is our purview, and resilience. And I think one of the things that we've learned without doubt is that resiliency is not an ideology, it's a reality. And one of the things I'm most proud of now is that when you talk to individuals in our organization or the general public, I find that ideas of resiliency and building smarter and living with nature is no longer seen as a left or a right issue, but everybody recognizes that it's something that we all need to engage in, and that's something new. I think also we've come to embrace the new. This was a place that in the past celebrated, protected, reveled in having an ossified past, and I think that Katrina showed that the past just wasn't working. And I think the fact now that we lead the nation by over 60% in startups per capita is because Katrina made us all into entrepreneurs now, and I think that's going to be good for the future. It was, I think, Richard Campanella that said that cities exist in dynamic equilibrium. Either they are evolving or they're dying. And that evolution is going to cause some of the challenges and strains that we have today, some of the pains, the discussion about gentrification, which is a very real discussion about who's coming along, who's participating. But these growing pains are because we're growing, probably for the first time in about 40 years.
Judy Rodin, there has been this running theme throughout the day of the good and the strain, and the struggle to coexist with growth, resilience, new things, and the strain of getting to that. Where do you see we are 10 years later?
I think we understand now that resilience is about physical infrastructure and about social and economic infrastructure, and that all three are critical for a truly resilient city. It may be that the word is overused, but I would submit so is the word love, and we each get to interpret it in our own way. This is a moment where each of us needs to take responsibility for making the New Orleans that we wish it could have been. And I do think that in the immediate aftermath, the concentration on the physical infrastructure may have swamped some of the concentration on doing the education the way that now retrospectively others think could have been done better, really thinking about the social and racial issues. But it was a physical infrastructure emergency that triggered it. And I do think now with the luxury, and that job, as John has said well, is not done, but with the luxury of shoring up those things which made New Orleans most physically vulnerable, there really is the opportunity now to not only learn from what wasn't done well in the 10 years that has passed, but to really begin to focus in a much more ambitious and frontal way on the social and economic infrastructure, because you cannot rebuild the economy of a city without equity, without social inclusion as part of that rebuild. And that obviously starts with education, but it continues with all of the things that will need to happen in these neighborhoods. And I am an outsider, and I think hearing the pain and the frustration that still exists, it really is a reminder of how important it is to both hear one another and to continue to believe that this is a journey that you, together with those of us who want to be helpful from the outside, must continue to undertake together. But it is a journey that is far from finished. That's what I certainly knew, but I have heard it over and over again today in a variety of ways. And I admire and agree with the sentiment, but it must be not an end state, but really a state of saying, let's continue to work to try to fix this together.
So, John Barry, what trajectory are we on?
I don't know. I don't think any of us know. If Gary talks about a black and a white narrative since the storm, I would agree with that, but I think you should have seen it before the storm. I used to consider this the most racist city that I knew of, and one of the most racist cities in the United States. I think there has been positive movement there. I hope that's the case. I think the best thing that's come out of the storm is the sense that people have to rely on themselves and take charge of things and make sure that they get things done. I think a lot of the positive things that have come out of New Orleans have been the result of that. Obviously, the influx of, whatever the number is, it's certainly more than 10,000, talented young people. That's generally positive, but then you create the problems with rising rents and driving folks out of their neighborhoods and gentrification, so forth and so on. And so I don't know where we're going. And then the other issue is the question of complacency. I've been pleased in general by the coverage so far nationally, that it has not been as celebratory as I had feared.
As 5 years was, you mean?
What's that?
As the 5-year anniversary perhaps was?
Maybe I didn't specifically recall that actually, and certainly everything today has pointed to continued problems and continued risk, but how much of that goes beyond this room and has penetrated the rest of the city, that's another question. As Mark said earlier, St. Bernard Parish twice voted down a tax to pay for the operations and maintenance of the brand new levee system. And if they can do that in St. Bernard Parish, and everybody here probably knows, every single home in St. Bernard Parish was underwater, every one of them. If they can do it in St. Bernard, and then you expect taxpayers around the country or in Shreveport to pay for, come on. Now, St. Bernard had a special problem because of their local government, the parish government. Those of you who are not from New Orleans may not know that the parish president's been indicted on several charges, and the whole thing's a mess. So they may have just lumped all taxes and government together. It may not reflect their view on flood protection, but I don't know what the future's going to be.
Well, let's talk about opportunity and challenge, just for fun. Bennie, I want to start with you, Bennie, talking about what you would identify as being the most hopeful things that have happened in the last 10 years in your hometown, and what have been the most challenging things, or where we have fallen short as a community, as a society, in making ourselves a better place?
I think the bottom line is just the word, like she said earlier, love. I mean, we're going to go through all these problems because it's just, some of them are out of our control, you know, natural disasters and this and that. But when Katrina hit, I saw white people, black people, everybody get together and gather and helping each other. And, like, we need that type of state of mind.
Did that last?
To build. No, it didn't last, but nothing, this not going to last. It's either going to, you know, everybody going to fake it till they make it or the next storm hit. And then it's going to happen again. You know, so we're going to just keep repeating this. You know, black people going to have their issues, and white people going to have their issues. They're going to have hate mixed in between, and it's never really going to end till some kind of way we all, you know, settle down and figure, you know, as human beings, that we have to love each other and work with each other as New Orleanians to help and build our city, and, you know, move all, you know, all over the world as Americans to do that all around the world.
Are you optimistic that can happen? I mean, do you have any expectations, whether it is of government or cultural leaders or educational leaders, to agree on how to do that?
I mean, yeah, I have to be. I have faith that that can happen, whether I'm here or not, whether it's in my lifetime or not, but you never know. But I still believe that's what's going to have to happen. We all going to live in turmoil just like our ancestors before us did. Whether you was a slave or whether you was rich and had all the money in the world but had a lot of hate in your heart for your own family members because you was greedy or whatever the case may be. But it's never going to be the world like we imagine it to be, or we would like it to be, you know, for everyone to live here together and peaceful as one.
I think it's fair to say that we're not all looking for everything to be roses and sunshine.
Not roses, but just to live and enjoy our family, our kids, without worrying about, you know, being robbed, killed, or hated, or burnt, or whipped, or whatever it might be. Stuff that we can control as humans.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? You know, it's really that's acts of evil, demonic spirits to me. People.
I do want to turn to questions, but I want to ask anybody who wants to respond on the panel this question, which is, what is the single thing you are most optimistic about that can happen in the next 10 years? So when we gather here again to talk about Katrina at 20 or 25, we can say, this was something we saw that was going to happen that made us better, whether it was closing the inequality gap, whether it was making housing more affordable, whether it was getting those taxes for the levies. What do you see as a glimmer of possibility in the next 10 years? Anybody who would like to pop up? Mike? If you don't volunteer, I call on you.
No, I mean, to me, it's really simple. If we want this recovery to be sustainable and to grow over time, then we've got to have a middle class that is accessible, that grows, and that moves up the income spectrum. The inequality gap has to be shrunk, and we have to have everybody participating in this recovery. That's the economic development imperative. And people say, how are you going to know success? I say, over the next 10 years, if our middle class grows, if everybody has a chance to join it, and it moves up the income axis, that's what success looks like to us.
Cherice?
Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
What's the optimistic thing that you can bring? Where's the glimmer of hope you see that could put us in a better position 10 years from now than what you see today?
I guess I would say that 10 years from now, hopefully all the initiatives that have been put forth, that they result in real growth for all of the citizens of New Orleans, not just the ones who have means, that the deficits, that people who are starting from a lower level, that they reach a fairer playing field so that they can advance, and especially children who have been under and miseducated, that they have equitable education and the best possible education for that child, for that particular child. If you teach deaf children, and I tell you I have a teacher that's wonderful with blind children, that means nothing to you. Each child has to have a fair and equitable education. That is what I hope, and that is what I see the city moving towards, hopefully.
Gary, and I'm going to ask hands up if you have questions.
I should talk like you do.
Yes, you should.
You know, I mean, I'm very optimistic about a lot of the stuff that Mike is up to, that, you know, economic development and the center of town and some of the bordering communities along the river, mid-city and such. I really do think they're going to thrive, and I really do feel like, you know, Startup City is going to continue to grow that way. But ultimately, I'm pessimistic about it because this city has the second greatest income gap in the country, and right now, it's getting worse. You know, the gap is getting wider, and, you know, as things are right now, unless things change, I only see it getting wider, 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 and so it's, you know, kind of the center of town is doing great and thriving. It's a fantastic place for tourists, but the neighborhoods, I just feel like the Katrina money is out, the FEMA money is pretty much over, and now it's just another kind of wreck community like a Detroit or parts of Philadelphia, Chicago, Cleveland.
I have a first question here.
School of Louisiana. And so my question is, after a full day of being here, wonderful people on the panel, interviewers, not one Latino, not one Latina. And so I'm wondering what the panelists believe is the reason that my community does not fit any of the narratives that have been constructed around Katrina.
Who wants to take that one on?
I mean, I will just report one piece of information. I was here in those first months, and it was really interesting because the mayor in this very hotel said, Mayor Nagin said a ridiculous thing. He's standing up before a group of people and saying, "I know what you're all thinking. What are we going to do about all the Mexicans in town?" And, you know, the whole room just kind of did this gasp. But the truth is that black and white, rich, poor, didn't make a difference. You really appreciated workers coming in and gutting the house, and I would have thought that the narrative that Latinos were kind of at the center of it more than they were prior. So, but I can't answer your question.
Is there anybody who feels they want to tackle it? Mike?
I think that so right now this region, if you look statistically, we lead the nation by 30% in Hispanic population growth. And if you look at us racially, we are becoming much more like the rest of America, multiracial. And I think the past of New Orleans was much more black-white kind of stasis. And now we're becoming much more like a typical American region or city, and that's a good thing. And so what you saw up here today, it absolutely needs to change because it doesn't reflect the future, what you're seeing.
Right here. Stand up.
I'm sorry.
Mark Schlefstein. We haven't really heard much about what I call the do-gooders, the Good Samaritans who arrived immediately after Katrina. A new small amount of people who have come in and stayed, who felt that they needed to help us recover and continue to fall in love with the city and stay here. What is their future if you see all of this gloom and doom?
John. John first, and then I'll come back.
I mean, they're making their own future. It's not for anybody here to say what their future is. I mean, they love I came here from Rhode Island many years ago. I love the place, but I wasn't really trying to create any space for myself. I just sort of tried to fit in. I think there's a different kind of energy with a lot of these people. You know, at an event a couple of months ago regarding startups and business types that I was invited to, I don't know why, but there was a billionaire there who said one of the things he loved about New Orleans was it was so open. And I'm thinking, are you nuts? You know, I mean, this was one of the most closed societies you could imagine. What has happened is this new energy is created sort of a parallel society. They don't care about the old crews. They started a, quote, new crew, crew de new, I think they call it. And, you know, it's not that they have sharp elbows. They don't even realize that they're elbowing part of what New Orleans was out of the way. But they are doing that.
Cherice, you want to weigh in on that?
Yes, and my response is as it relates to the indigenous cultural arts community. In the immediate aftermath of the event, there were lots of individuals who came and they wanted to save New Orleans, save the culture of New Orleans, save the brass band, save the social and pleasure, save the people in the African American carnival traditions. But the unfortunate narrative of that is most of the time it was a contemporary plantation society. They would ask us to come to their offices, come to them, to the big house. Everybody in the big house is getting paid, but instead of us really being in the big house, we were in the outhouse, and we all know what happens in the outhouse. They wanted us to literally throw up all of our information so that they could go to foundations and basically pay themselves a middle-class salary to let little drips and drops come down into our community, $50 and $100 at a time.
We have another question over here.
Hi, I'm Sally Stevens with the New Orleans Cooperative Development Project and Rhythm Conspiracy Productions, and artist and worker-owned cooperative. Michael, this is really specifically directed to you, and it's in relation to what Cherice just said. And when they launched 10,000 small businesses here, when Goldman Sachs launched that 4 years ago, you talked about the Cleveland experiment and the cooperatives going on there, and I was so happy because I thought, oh, maybe something's really going to happen around that here, finally, because I think we've needed that for a long time. And certainly we're a very cooperative
what's
culture.
Your
but
question, please.
Really, why hasn't that happened? It seems like the whole recovery was so market-based and not community and people-based. And
Mike?
I'm wondering if you can give us some insight into that, and if it's still continuing on that neoliberal path.
So I'm not familiar with exactly what you're talking about, but the 10,000 Small Business I am, and I was involved with it at Delgado, where my wife teaches. And my understanding is that program has actually been very successful for the small businesses that have gone through it, and that's my background actually, is in small business. So I think that's happening. In terms of being market-driven, one thing we have to recognize here, and it pains me that we don't, is that we were the beneficiary here of about 70 billion plus of federal funds that came in, and 140 billion of total dollars. It has not been perfect by a long shot. And I always say that we've had remarkable progress, but not close to success. But there was a lot of public involvement in what happened here, and I just think that we should recognize that.
I have a question here. You stand.
My name is Alicia Johnson. I'm a New Orleans native and resident of Gentilly. And I guess this question maybe is for Michael, but just to put it out there, just a concern and a question about our commitment as a community to make sure that there are jobs, particularly for a generation of young people, the generation under me, who got stiffed in many ways, in the educational system, and are now like in their late 20s and 30s and trying to make a way for themselves. I know of someone very close to me who keeps paying out money for trainings, but can't find a job. And I just want to know what our commitment is to creating more jobs, and to helping to make sure that some of our New Orleans natives, and particularly our young black men, have jobs for the skills that they're paying for to get trained.
And if I can broaden out a little bit, Judy, I would like for you to weigh in as well, because when we talk about resiliency and we talk about bringing these cities back, to what degree do we also include this idea of continued employment, especially for young residents who, as we know, their unemployment rate is skyrocketing while everybody else seems to be flourishing? But Mike first.
I'll give 30.
I want to start with Mike because she directed the question, but then I want you to weigh in.
I'll be the moose push, and I'll get over to it very quickly. So it's a great question. The problem with workforce programs, and I was involved in them here, I've been involved in other places, there's just always this mismatch between the training and what the employers really want, so it doesn't work. So what we've started doing is going to big companies like Chevron, like Turner, like Latham, and saying, what exactly do you want? Then we're going to schools like Delgado and Nunez, and we're helping them build the curricula that are exactly the exact skills that they want at those jobs. And we're finding that at a small scale, it's working. We're placing students in real jobs, associate's degrees, that are going out making $35 an hour plus benefits, and that's the path, I think, to the middle class. So it's working, but now we need to scale it. But the problem that you point out is absolutely been a problem in the past, no doubt.
I would have answered your earlier question about what we hope in the future, and for me the greatest hope is that 52% of unemployed African American males is a number that in the next 10 years we'll look back on and say this was a rallying cry and a turning point. I just came before this panel from an amazing meeting that the mayor had with the CEOs of some of the large anchor institutions in town, and there is a tremendous amount of effort going on with regard to the kind of training that Mike talked about, but more importantly, it needs to start with the employers. Often the argument that the skills aren't sufficient is a kind of shield behind which the employer hides. And so getting employers to recognize that there are many skills that don't appear on a traditional resume or on a GPA that is often how people hire. And so we and others have been working with Opportunity Youth here and around the country to make sure that young people who have lots of talents already not only in some cases get the right skills and training, which may be necessary, but get the right pipeline and access to employment opportunities, many of which currently exist in New Orleans and should be capitalized on.
Bennie, I want to bring you in because you're the black man on the panel, the young black man on the panel, and I wonder if you can give us a little reality check about this gap between people who are seeking opportunities and people who can't quite take advantage of those opportunities, especially among young black men you know.
Yeah, it's the same. It's the struggles that they're going through. You know, that's a part of the problem. Just in the inner cities, you know, like the blighted properties, not really having just the utensils of being put in the right position to even want to work. They're stressed out. They have other issues, mental issues. They're traumatized. You know, we talk about the crime and different things, but like I didn't, you know, like for instance, just me. For the most part, I'm a well-rounded, cool individual, but you know, I'm dealing with trying to, you know, have a brass band and make a career of it. But I also, 4 of my members was murdered. You know, I'm only 39 years old, and I done played over 1,000 jazz funerals for people who didn't reach over the age of 30. And so on and so forth. So now you're telling me I need to do this or do that. I'm gonna do it, but when I go, I can't get the job anyway. So why bother? And that's the mind frame of some of the young guys, my friends, and people in the inner cities. But then they have other people who go on to school and graduate and get diplomas and degrees, and then they'll tell them they overqualified or they don't have a position here in the city. And so, with all that, I mean, it's where we at now with the chaos and the crime in New Orleans. You know, and I don't know what's, you know, going to be the resolution or to fixing that problem, but I could tell you that's where a lot of the guys are who we don't have a chance to talk to. When we see them, we judging them. You know, oh, murderer. You know, he's a murderer. Throw him away. Give him life in jail. If you find him, kill him, you know, shoot him or whatever, but it's a lot of pain inside of those young individuals. They're human, and you know, they didn't want their life to be that way. They didn't plan it like that. Oh, I'm gonna kill me some people before I make 14 or 13 years old. I'm gonna rob a bank. It just, you know, it happened. You know.
Yeah. We have another question back here.
Hi, Joanne Ricci with the Greater New Orleans Foundation. I'm really struck by Judith and Bennie's focus on love. And love is the root of philanthropy, loving one another, loving humanity. And before, during, and after Katrina, it was the hundreds, if not thousands, of leaders and staff of nonprofits who played an extraordinary role in rebuilding this community and continue. And And when I talk about philanthropy, I'm not talking about just foundations. I'm talking about corporations and small businesses and individuals who give of their time and their treasure to support the nonprofit sector. And what we've learned, I think, in New Orleans, and I think what we've learned throughout the country in any of these disasters, whether they're natural or man-made, is the role that nonprofits play. They're the first line that come back. And I'm curious what the panel thinks about the resilience and the need for our nonprofits to remain strong and how they would do that. Judith?
Well, which is why we made our grants to and through the Greater New Orleans Foundation and other local institutions. So clearly you need the nonprofit sector, the smaller community foundations that are based here, and the civil society sector more broadly. The only disagreement that I have is that I think the basic fundamental is the community. And nonprofits are in and serving and of communities, and that's what makes them strong and meaningful. So the sentiments that continue to be expressed around the communities not working, the communities not gaining access to what is necessary, is a cautionary tale for the nonprofits as it is for all of us. And I think we need to think again about how we all serve the community level interests as we develop and forward towards the next 10 years. And that would be a very, very good outcome indeed.
I'm, of course, over time, but I have one more question that I promised I would take, so come join me.
Thank you. My accent will tell you that I'm not from New Orleans. I'm here with my wife, Carol. We're Australians. And a little while ago, we were gifted with a story about some young international backpackers that were in the Superdome during Katrina. And that experience and that 4 days they shared with me had changed their lives forever. It awoke in them prejudices, fears. It also awoke some qualities that they didn't know they had, that of leadership, courage, and the ability to be, without a beer, resilient. And my question, I suppose, is not so much to the panel, but I welcome their responses, but to the people out here. As a visitor to your city and a lover of New Orleans, is there something that's different about you now than it was before Katrina, personally?
I'm going to, since you can't all answer that question right now, I'm going to ask you to go back to those cards on your table where we started the day, in which we asked you to fill them out and share them with us, because we'd like to hear what you think. We'd like to know your answer to that question. How did Katrina bring out the worst in us? How did it bring out the best in us? And where do we go from there? I want to thank our panel. They've been very candid, very honest, and it's been a perfect wrap-up. And that question, by the way, was a lovely way to end the day. I want to thank the audience. I want to thank our audience online as well that's been streaming and watching us all day. And as a special little farewell treat, don't go, because we're going to have a little, how can we call it, exit music with Hot 8. And then on the second floor, there will be drinks and a little reception, and we may all have a little beer. Okay, thank you.